China just sentenced 78-year-old pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai to 20 years in prison for advocating freedom in Hong Kong. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called it unjust and tragic and is demanding China release him immediately. Lai founded Apple Daily newspaper, Hong Kong's most outspoken pro-democracy publication, now shut down by Beijing. Trump personally asked Xi Jinping to release Lai, saying, "He's not well, he's an older man." Lai's son says this is essentially a death sentence given his father's age and deteriorating health in detention. Stay with me because this case shows how China is crushing freedom in Hong Kong and what it means for Taiwan, American policy, and anyone who dares criticize the Chinese Communist Party. What's up, everyone? Marcus Reed here with Senate Decoded, where I break down international human rights abuses and authoritarian crackdowns. Real quick, if you want coverage of China's oppression in Hong Kong, the Chinese Communist Party's war on freedom, and how the U.S. is responding to human rights violations, hit that subscribe button right now. The Jimmy Lai case is one of the most important human rights stories in the world. All right, here's what just happened. On Monday, February 9th, 2026, Beijing-backed courts in Hong Kong sentenced Jimmy Lai, a 78-year-old billionaire publisher and democracy activist, to 20 years in prison. The charges: conspiracy to collude with foreign forces and publishing seditious materials. His crime: running a pro-democracy newspaper and calling for international sanctions against China. Secretary of State Marco Rubio immediately condemned the sentence, calling it unjust and urging China to grant Lai humanitarian parole. Lai's son says this is a death sentence. His father has lost significant weight, suffers from heart issues and diabetes, and is being kept in terrible conditions. Trump previously asked Xi Jinping personally to release Lai and is expected to raise the case again when he visits Beijing in April. I'm breaking down who Jimmy Lai is, what he's accused of, why China is doing this, what Marco Rubio and Trump are saying, what this means for Hong Kong's freedom, and whether anyone can save Lai from dying in prison. Let's get into it. Let's start with who Jimmy Lai is, because understanding his story is essential to understanding why China wants him dead. Jimmy Lai, now 78 years old, is a Hong Kong billionaire, media entrepreneur, and democracy activist. Born in mainland China in 1948, Lai grew up during Mao's Communist Revolution, witnessed the horrors of totalitarianism firsthand, fled to Hong Kong as a stowaway at age 12, started with nothing, worked in a garment factory, built a clothing empire, Giordano brand, became a billionaire through hard work. His business success gave him the wealth and platform to become a pro-democracy advocate. Founding Apple Daily, in 1995, Lai founded Apple Daily, Pinguo Ribao, a tabloid-style newspaper in Hong Kong. Apple Daily became Hong Kong's most outspoken pro-democracy publication, a fierce critic of the Chinese Communist Party. Popular among Hong Kong citizens, circulation peaked at 500,000 and plus. A thorn in Beijing's side for 26 years, the newspaper covered CCP corruption and human rights abuses, Hong Kong's fight for autonomy, Tiananmen Square massacre, banned topic in mainland China, Chinese government scandals, pro-democracy movements, Apple Daily's motto, "An apple a day keeps the dictator away." Lai's activism. Beyond his newspaper, Lai funded pro-democracy politicians and activists, participated in protests personally despite being elderly and wealthy, met with U.S. officials including Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, and members of Congress, lobbied for international sanctions against China, and Hong Kong officials spoke to international media about Hong Kong's fight for freedom. Supported the 2014 umbrella movement and 2019-2020 protests. He used his wealth, platform, and voice to fight for freedom. The 2019-2020 Hong Kong protests. In 2019, Hong Kong erupted in massive protests triggered by an extradition bill that would allow Hong Kong to send people to mainland China for trial, fears that Beijing was eroding Hong Kong's autonomy, demands for democratic reforms. The protests lasted months, involved millions of Hong Kong residents, became violent at times. Police crackdowns, protester tactics drew international attention. Jimmy Lai was a prominent voice supporting the protests. He was 71, 72 years old at the time, but he marched in protests alongside young activists, used Apple Daily to cover the protests favorably, called for international support for Hong Kong, met with U.S. officials to request help. Beijing saw him as a dangerous enemy. The national security law. In June 2020, after the protests died down, Beijing imposed the national security law on Hong Kong. This law criminalized secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces, allowed mainland Chinese security agents to operate in Hong Kong, permitted trials to be held in mainland China, carried penalties up to life in prison, essentially ended Hong Kong's promised autonomy. The law was designed to crush dissent and punish pro-democracy activists like Jimmy Lai. Lai's arrest. On August 10, 2020, Hong Kong police raided Apple Daily's newsroom with 200 officers. They arrested Jimmy Lai, seized computers and documents, froze Apple Daily's bank accounts, charged Lai with collusion with foreign forces. This was the beginning of the end for Hong Kong's free press. Apple Daily's closure. In June 2021, authorities arrested Apple Daily's top editors, froze all company assets, made it impossible to operate. Apple Daily published its final edition on June 24, 2021. The front page featured staff waving goodbye. Headline, Hong Kongers bid a painful farewell in the rain. 1 million copies printed, sold out immediately. Hong Kong citizens lined up for hours to buy the final edition as a form of protest and remembrance. With Apple Daily shut down, Hong Kong lost its last major pro-democracy voice. Lai's detention. Jimmy Lai has been imprisoned since December 2020. He's been held in maximum security detention, solitary confinement for extended periods, harsh conditions despite his age and health issues. He's now been imprisoned for over 5 years, awaiting and during trial. His health. According to his son, Sebastian Lai, Jimmy has lost significant weight in detention. He suffers from heart issues. He has diabetes. His health is deteriorating rapidly. Prison conditions are making it worse. We're incredibly worried about his life, Sebastian told Fox News. Lai's faith. Jimmy Lai is a devout Catholic. His son says he's a man of deep faith. No matter how hard the conditions he was under, he still did the right thing. Lai believes he's suffering for a righteous cause, fighting for freedom against tyranny. Why he stayed. Before his arrest, Lai had multiple opportunities to flee Hong Kong. He could have gone to the U.S., where his son lives, moved to the U.K., sought asylum anywhere, but he chose to stay. Sebastian Lai explained, his father refused to abandon his principles or colleagues. Lai believed that if he fled, it would demoralize other activists, suggest the fight was lost, be a betrayal of Hong Kong, so he stayed, knowing he would likely be arrested. That's the measure of his courage. Now let's examine what China actually convicted Jimmy Lai of, because the charges reveal how Beijing criminalizes free speech. The charges. Lai was convicted of 2 main offenses. 1, conspiracy to collude with foreign forces, national security law. Under Hong Kong's Beijing-imposed national security law, Lai was charged with conspiring to collude with foreign forces. What this means: working with foreign governments or organizations to take action against China or Hong Kong that endangers national security. What prosecutors claimed Lai did. According to prosecutors, Lai used Apple Daily to lobby for international sanctions against China and Hong Kong, met with U.S. officials, including Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and members of Congress, called for blockades or hostile actions by foreign governments, coordinated with international pro-democracy groups, used his media platform to advance foreign interference. The court called Lai the mastermind of these alleged plots. 2. Conspiracy to publish seditious materials, colonial-era crimes ordinance. Lai was also convicted under Hong Kong's colonial-era crimes ordinance of publishing seditious materials. What this means: publishing content designed to incite hatred or contempt against authorities, undermining public order, creating instability. What prosecutors claimed: prosecutors cited hundreds of Apple Daily articles they said were designed to incite public hatred or contempt against Chinese and Hong Kong authorities. Examples include articles criticizing CCP leaders, coverage of Hong Kong protests, op-eds calling for democracy, stories about human rights abuses in China, editorials supporting international sanctions. Essentially, journalism critical of the government became a crime. The trial, Lai's trial, began in December 2023, lasted over a year, was held in a Beijing-controlled court, had no jury. Beijing eliminated jury trials for national security cases, was decided by judges appointed by Hong Kong's Beijing loyalist chief executive. 3 judges decided Lai's fate. All were handpicked by Beijing. All are known for pro-CCP rulings. None are independent. This was not a fair trial. It was political theater. The verdict: on Monday, February 9, 2026, the judges found Lai guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to collude with foreign forces, 2 counts. Conspiracy to publish seditious materials, 1 count. The sentence: Lai was sentenced to 20 years in prison. At 78 years old, this is effectively a life sentence. Lai will be 98 years old when released, if he survives. Why these charges are absurd. Let's be clear about what Lai actually did. What he's accused of: running a newspaper critical of the government, meeting with U.S. officials, completely normal for a prominent publisher. Calling for sanctions, protected speech in any free country. Publishing articles criticizing authorities, fundamental journalism. What he did not do: commit violence, spy for a foreign government, steal state secrets, plot terrorism, actually endanger anyone's safety. In a free country, everything Lai did would be protected by the First Amendment or equivalent free speech, press protections. But China doesn't have free speech, and now neither does Hong Kong. Lai's defense: Lai and his defense team argued criminalization of speech. This case criminalizes political speech and journalism, not genuine national security threats. Lawful advocacy: Lai's calls for international pressure on Beijing were lawful advocacy, not conspiracy. Routine activities: meetings with U.S. officials and media appearances were routine for a prominent publisher, not evidence of collusion. Freedom of the press: Apple Daily was exercising freedom of the press, which is supposed to be protected in Hong Kong under the Basic Law, Hong Kong's mini-constitution. The court rejected all of these arguments. The message: Beijing's message is clear. If you criticize the CCP, support democracy, call for international action against China, run independent media, exercise free speech, then you will be crushed. Co-defendants: Lai was not the only one convicted. Other Apple Daily executives and pro-democracy activists were also sentenced. Chung Kim-hung, former Apple Daily publisher, 21 months. Other co-defendants, various sentences. But Lai got the longest sentence because he was the leader and most prominent. Already served time. Lai has already served more than 5 years in prison, awaiting trial. Serving sentences for other charges: fraud conviction, organizing unauthorized assemblies during protests. So by the time his 20-year sentence is complete, he'll have been imprisoned for 25 plus years total. He'll be over 100 years old if he lives that long, but he won't. Now let's talk about how the United States is responding, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Rubio's statement: immediately after Lai's sentencing, Secretary of State Marco Rubio released a statement. The conviction shows the world that Beijing will go to extraordinary lengths to silence those who advocate fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong. The United States urges the authorities to grant Mr. Lai humanitarian parole. Let's break this down. Beijing will go to extraordinary lengths to silence those who advocate fundamental freedoms. Rubio is calling out China for imprisoning a 78-year-old man for 20 years, essentially sentencing him to death, all for advocating democracy and free speech. The United States urges the authorities to grant Mr. Lai humanitarian parole. Humanitarian parole means temporarily releasing Lai on medical humanitarian grounds, allowing him to seek medical treatment, letting him die with dignity outside prison. Rubio is asking China for mercy, but will China show any? No. Why Rubio cares? Marco Rubio has been a longtime advocate for Hong Kong's freedom and opponent of Chinese authoritarianism. As a senator, Rubio introduced Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, passed 2019, met with Hong Kong activists including Joshua Wong, called for sanctions on Chinese and Hong Kong officials involved in crackdowns, criticized corporations kowtowing to China, and Rubio has a personal connection to Jimmy Lai. Your article includes a photo of Rubio with Sebastian Lai, Jimmy's son, holding a poster of Jimmy Lai. Rubio has met with the Lai family and promised to fight for Jimmy's release. Trump's previous comments: President Trump previously spoke out about Lai's detention. In December 2025, Trump said, "I spoke to President Xi about it and I asked him to consider his release. He's not well, he's an older man, and he's not well, so I did put that request out. We'll see what happens." Key points. 1. Trump raised it directly with Xi. Trump personally asked the Chinese leader to release Lai. That's significant. Most presidents wouldn't spend political capital on individual dissidents. 2. He's not well, he's an older man. Trump appealed to Xi's mercy based on Lai's age and health. This is a humanitarian argument. 3. We'll see what happens. Trump didn't demand. He asked, and left it open-ended. Trump's dilemma. Trump is in a difficult position. On one hand, he wants to be tough on China. He's negotiating broader trade and security deals with Xi. Human rights advocates expect him to act. The MAGA base supports Hong Kong freedom. On the other hand, Xi won't release Lai. It would show weakness. Pushing too hard could derail other negotiations. Trump needs Xi's cooperation on North Korea, trade, other issues. Xi holds leverage, can arrest Americans in China, manipulate trade, etc. So Trump has to balance principle with pragmatism. Trump's upcoming Beijing visit. Trump is expected to visit Beijing in April 2026 for negotiations with Xi. Human rights advocates and lawmakers are urging Trump to raise Lai's case directly with Xi again, make it a priority, not just a side issue. Demand Lai's release as condition for deals, publicly condemn the sentence. But will Trump do that, or will he prioritize trade deals and let Lai rot in prison? Your article says silence would be read in Beijing as acquiescence. If Trump doesn't push hard for Lai, Xi will conclude that Trump doesn't really care about human rights and will accept China's oppression. Congressional pressure. Some members of Congress are pushing Trump to act. Rubio, now Secretary of State, has influence. Other China hawks like Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, Human Rights Caucus members, but it's unclear if there's enough pressure to change Trump's approach. What the U.S. can actually do. Realistically, the U.S. has limited options. Diplomatic pressure raise Lay's case in every meeting with China, make it a public priority. Rally allies to join the pressure sanctions target Hong Kong officials involved in Lay's prosecution, freeze assets, deny visas, but U.S. already has some sanctions in place. Trade leverage, threaten trade consequences unless Lai is released. Use tariffs or market access as bargaining chips, but this hurts U.S. economy too. Symbolic actions give Lai awards like Congressional Gold Medal. Name buildings or streets after him. Keep his case in the news. What the U.S. can't do, the U.S. cannot. Force China to release Lai, invade Hong Kong to free him. Impose costs severe enough to change China's behavior. China is a nuclear power with the world's second largest economy. We have limited leverage. The brutal truth, Jimmy Lai will likely die in prison. China will not release him because it would show weakness. It would encourage other dissidents. Xi Jinping doesn't care about international criticism. There's no cost high enough to make China back down. So all the U.S. can do is keep Lai's case in the spotlight, impose symbolic costs, document China's human rights abuses, support Lai's family, but we probably can't save him. Now let's talk about what Jimmy Lai's sentencing means for Hong Kong's freedom and Taiwan's future. Hong Kong's promised autonomy. When Britain returned Hong Kong to China in 1997, Beijing